Hello, everyone, and welcome to the People Strategy Forum. Today's guest is on a mission to help leaders turn what feels like chaos into creative power. Frankie Berkoben knows firsthand how ADD and how it has strengths, how it has intensities, the complexity, nonstop ideas, all that can trip you up in leadership if left unmanaged. So she knows how ADD can be turned into your secret weapon. And so we're going to learn about that today. So, from Airbnb to engineering labs to Google, she has coached high achievers to build systems that work with their brains and not against them. So, here's the thing, as a leader out there, you're listening into this, and if you want to retain top talent, you have to build workplaces where people can show up as themselves and thrive in that and then their environment. So today, Frankie is going to show us how to leverage your strengths in your team's strengths, how to reduce friction and lead with authenticity, and even in the most complex environments. So welcome, Frankie.
Hi. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Sam.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited to talk to you about this topic. So it's like I myself, I've lived with ADD before they even knew what it was. So it's been quite a fun journey for me, and I'm love to dive into this in detail with you. And so Frankie, before we kind of go into things, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and how you got into this field and how you become one of the most coveted advisors to these top tier organizations.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, it started obviously in college and school. I did really well until I didn't. And so there was this kind of, I was either excellent or abysmal, and there was no rhyme or reason in between. And there was no word for that experience. And I went into grad school, same thing. This persisted throughout my career of like either extremely high potential and inconsistent follow through. I was in engineering consulting. I worked for government for a little while. And um, ultimately, it was during the pandemic that I started to gain an awareness of, oh, this might be something called neurodivergence. This might be like that you can have high achievement and high potential and high intelligence alongside um, alongside executive functioning challenges. And I didn't even know what the terms were. So there was a big, awakening for me in during the pandemic around that. And so that completely reframed my my sense of self. Previously, we've gone from shame-based motivation, or I'm lazy, I'm unmotivated, I'm disorganized. Whereas in fact, it's the opposite. I was working so hard, and I started to understand and start working with more and more people who fall into this category of twice exceptional. So exceptional, they might be gifted in some way, intellectually gifted or creatively or artistically gifted, as well as having some challenges in terms of the implementation and follow through. And in a world that values consistency and predictability, and especially in consulting, where you're billing by the quarter hour,
Yeah.
It's really not great if something may take you 3 hours or 3 weeks. Like they'd like to know that. So there's a lot of pressure to become more predictable, have a less spiky set of variability in performance, but also what your strengths are. And that shift for me was going from, I felt like my strengths were a liability, that it didn't matter that I was smart. It didn't matter that I was a creative thinker if nothing came out of it. So it actually became a negative. And so then when I started training as a coach, so I got my own ADHD coach, transformed so much for me after 10 years of therapy that had done nothing. And initially to become my own coach so that I could manage myself, so that I could just get right back into the workforce. And instead, I found that I loved it. As you train in this area, you have to start working with people. And it gave me that, a sense of I belong. This is my calling. This is my vocation. And so I launched my business in, 2021 and was fully booked within within about a month, which shows that there's a huge demand for people who get it. And
Yes.
it's not just ADHD. It's ADHD in the presence of giftedness or high performance or high potential. And there's still a lot of stigma around it. So I started my coaching work with twice exceptional adults. And over the past couple of years, it's really shifted to maybe only about a third of my clients do identify as neurodivergent. And I was like, this is really interesting. So looking into it, I started being like, what are my clients telling me? What is the market telling me about what's happening? And it turns out that a lot of the overwhelm, the analysis paralysis, the the emotional like experiences, the high
Mhm.
stress emotions, brain fog, they're experienced by a lot of people when under stress, regardless of whether they identify as neurodivergent or could be even diagnosable.
Mm.
Um, and so that had me thinking, well, what's the common link here? And the link is executive functions. So when we're stressed or sick or new parents, I became a parent a few years ago too, just your cognitive processes go wonky.
Yeah.
When your bandwidth is squeezed, you're not making wise decisions. You're not able to regulate your focus and attention or emotions. You're not able to switch from one topic to another, from meeting to meeting with quite the same ease. And so that's the common thread. It's not ADHD. It's, well, this like context dependent ability to be that smart, intuitive, creative, inspirational leader or manager or IC. Um, and so in the past year, that's really what I've been doing more of in my coaching work. Is
Yeah.
work, yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, I'd love to hear more about what it's like with your first engagements with your clients. And so I imagine leaders are out there listening in. They're saying that, well, we do have people on our team. They and people think differently nowadays. I mean, we have this differentiation of types of thinking, as you mentioned, maybe per person has ADD, maybe they have they're autistic, they're on the spectrum somewhere there, and so leaders are wondering, how do we manage best in this environment? And so, do they often reach out to you directly, or is it more of the individuals that are suffering or trying to figure out how to be most productive in these environments?
Hmm. I have a mixture of both. Like consulting would be, how do we help
Yeah,
our employees? But most of the leaders I work with are experiencing this.
yeah,
If you think about it, most of the people who are like, gosh, I'm losing the word right now, but who can like bring people along with them,
yeah.
who are very inspirational and but also have the ability to think strategically. One thing that I see with all of my clients, regardless of medical diagnosis, because neurodiversity is normal, we all think differently,
Mhm.
and neurodivergent presumes that there's a norm, that there's a healthy,
Yeah.
which is so that, semantics aside, um, the common thing that I see with all of my clients, um, and again, some don't identify as neurodivergent, is being able to see the big picture, the full system,
Hmm.
things interconnected, everything ever all at once. And um, that seems great until you come up against having to move forward and constraining everything into a narrow path and then make progress on that linear path. And it turns out that about 25% of the population, the global population, and I'm not sure about the studies on this, but like it is something like that, is thinks in this big picture way, but 75%, or at least a much larger number, thinks in a more linear fashion. Oh,
Huh.
I go from A to B to C to D,
Okay.
as opposed to I see all of the alphabet and all of the colors and all of the numbers all at once. And so that leads to a lot of friction when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to decision making, when it comes to strategy to implementation. Is the systems thinkers, it takes a lot of effort or conviction or confidence or experience to be able to narrow down, I see everything, and then this is the path.
Hmm.
And people who are in go, 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 let's hit our OKRs for
Yeah.
this quarter, etc., can get, there can be a lot more frustration, or you don't get it. Like, why are you zooming back out again? I thought we'd already constrained the scope of this. So that's something to work with, both as an individual, if you think in this way, but also if you are on a team and you see this friction between these two types of thinking, systems and global big picture thinking and linear thinking. So this applies to everybody, really, I guess.
Hmm.
And the thing to think about here is also not just how people think, but the emotional impacts. If you think in one way and you're being forced to go a different direction, it can raise anxiety levels. It
Sure.
can lead to responses and a sharp tongue, or showing up in a way that doesn't serve your organization or your reputation or the project or initiative well. So that's also part of it. It's not just about what happens up here, but our bodies are our brains too, and emotions are part of that. So what happens for a systems thinker when they're forced to just pick a thing and go with it, and they're like, but is, what are we missing? Are we missing consequences or possibilities or contingencies that will
Right.
help us
Yeah.
in the proverbial down the line? And then from the other side, there's the impatience. Like, we're not moving forward because you're insisting on the why, figuring out the big picture before we can move forward. So
Hmm.
that's a common source of frustration and understanding, or friction too. Understanding, oh, what sort of brain are you? What sort of, or not sort of brain, like it's not a classification, but how do I prefer to think about things?
Yes.
And when does it switch from big picture to go?
Yes. And so let's dig into that a bit more. But I'd love to just to reflect on what's happened in our society over the past 50 years or so. Because I remember, back in the day when I was a child, I used to watch my father pour over, these sheets of paper, which the green columns and the cubes in there, and writing on us and on the spreadsheet of the old days on this journal, right? And everything was done off computer. And then and so if you think about the pace of change during that time, you had time to take out your eraser and change things and move it from one column to the next, and you're is very systematic and patient. And then but the speed of life has just intensified, and the release of computers, we can do things faster, and the learning curve is starting to accelerate. In comes social media, where we're bombarded with different messages, different emotions throughout the day, and now the emergence of artificial intelligence, and where the pace of change is becoming even more exponential. And so, just thinking about that journey over the past 50 years is mind-boggling. Now, the pace of change, and it just makes you kind of want to freeze up. It's like, geez, it's like I used to have a moment to be silent and think about what am I going to do next. And now it may be just that the snap of a finger, and you have to make a decision in order to keep up with the competition and so forth. So a lot of this is bringing stress and anxiety along with it, especially for those individuals that have not been along in that journey. Maybe you're born into it and it's like, okay, now I know what social media is like. Now I'm AI native. I know what it's like. And so, um, does the are you finding that the demographic or the generation is a big impact on your how you help people?
Um, Not so much, but I am seeing a lot more people embrace more manual methods to sit with things and be more intentional.
Hmm.
And you make a very, very good point in terms of the information overwhelm. We are not wired to be able um, to deal with such a large amount of information. And this has been like, a fear from the Greek philosophers to,
Yeah.
um, the Victorians, the age of information, but, and that puts us in like, our brains have to work harder. And so, just in order to screen out, to just keep on narrowing our focus, like, what is it that is important and relevant? And what we do, I mean, what all animals do is like we have heuristics, like you have not necessarily biases, but like ways to screen out it automatically.
Hmm.
And that can look like stereotypes, but it can also look like, oh, that apple is not moving, it's not a tiger. Or, I don't know, like
Yeah.
something like that. um, so it just means that like our brains are being more taxed um, pervasively
Hmm.
throughout, like, from all angles, which means, of course, our executive functions, our ability to think, plan, and implement plans that are relevant and efficient or efficacious, I mean, effective, um, is is lessened. So I think that what I've been seeing more is um, people resonating with ADHD traits
Hmm.
regardless of knowing that they have ADHD, but because of the pace of the modern world in some way. And I'm not like, please don't excerpt that as a soundbite, but like we are all in a state of near overwhelm. We're close to our thresholds in many, many ways, and that impacts how we're able to think and move wisely through things.
And so, what is the first step there? Is it to kind of sort through the noise and to understand what is the core thing that we need to focus upon and take action upon? What is the way to distill down all this information that we get?
Mm. Well, of course, it's working with a coach like me.
Yes.
No, but to be in all seriousness, it's, well, first you start with yourself.
Hmm.
What are your values, and what do you know about your strengths? What do you know about um, what lights you up? You can also use, what do you care about? You can get to it through what really gets your goat, because
Yeah.
that tells you something as well. It's not just what you're drawn to, but what you feel about.
Hmm.
Um, and that will tell you a lot about the themes that are important to you. And then from there, it's what might it look like on the outside. And um, and then you can start sifting things out into, this moves me towards, or this moves me away from.
Hmm.
Um, and so there's the values, but also it's not just what do I want to do, how do I want to go about my life, but who do I want to be? In conversations with leaders, um, it's so many of their conversations and work is focused on strategy or on managing others, or family lives, or doing. It's external, and very few people are thinking about, who do I want to be? Who am I? Who am I proud to be? And when am I not proud to be me? And what does that tell me about what information I'm taking in from the system around me. Because, obviously we're social creatures. We respond to norms and, social pressure. Both of us live in the US. So, right, there's, there's different norms and expectations, and, capitalist, productivity, individualism, there's a lot of different things that impact the way we think. There's just cultural considerations there. So making sense of it all starts with going deep and being personal. And once you have that, you can then develop your axioms to live by. You can develop your decision matrices to be like, yeah, I generally say no to this sort of volunteer commitment.
Yes.
Or, okay, like I can see how this particular platform isn't serving me or my business because this is the impact it's having on me and how I'm able to work, or this is what's happening to our team as a result. So it is not tactics based. It is almost philosophical. Like, who are you? What are your values? Who do you want to be? How do you want to be that person in one way today? How can you be that person by the end of the quarter? Like, what are the behaviors that trickle down from that core identity?
Right. So
I'm not expecting to go there.
Yeah, no, that's good. So what I'm hearing from you is that the first step as an individual is for us to really do that self-reflection, understanding what our beliefs, our I guess our kind of our operational system. And so how do we want to define ourselves and understand our and put a ring fence around it, so we understand what our belief system is, so that we can take action upon that. Now, the next thing that you mentioned is like, having a protocol for something that comes up. Conflict. I got an argument with my spouse. Conflict comes up. What is the protocol of dealing with that? And so you have that standard operating procedure of dealing with that, or a new project comes up at work. How do we crack that nut? And so getting those tools in place that are specific to your life, to where you can know how to take action in that situation. Am I capturing that right?
Yeah, and I love the fact that you said operating system. So it's not just an operating process, but what else is part of our operating system other than our values and our beliefs? Our brains.
Yes.
So we talked about systems thinking versus linear thinking. There are lots of different ways that we process information. Some people are very strongly logic-based, and other people resonate with emotions, stories, metaphors, different things. There's also what it looks like, sensory processing. Some people learn or take in information or convey information in written form, or in pictures or graphs or images. Others take in information and really just by hearing it, and they don't need to write things down at the same time. So there's this kind of, what is part of your operating system for new information that comes in, figuring out how to make sense of it, making a plan around it. And the plan around it might be like, this is irrelevant to me, I'm going to jettison it, and it's no longer in my on my docket. But most of the time you're like, well, there's something here. And then there's what happens with that. How do you make that plan? And then there's, implementing and following through. And so that has a lot to do with executive functions, task switching, focus, attention. And a lot of those can be supported by those sensory processing modalities. You work better with pen and paper because you don't get lost in all of the different tabs, or there's something to do with the tactile feel that helps ingrain it and helps you make sense of it and own it, then that's worth doing. So there's the implementation, and then communicating it out. So there's remembering, filing things away in memory, short-term and long-term. Do you need supports around that? Is there a way to do that that is internal, or is there support externally? And then communicating. A lot of people with ADHD tend to be verbal processors. They talk to think.
Yes.
And so in meetings, that can look like taking up a lot of airtime. But so this whole operating system is, what are my tendencies? What are my preferences? What works well for me? And then in the context of this entire session, right, leveraging those strengths to minimize friction. Well, knowing what they are is, first of all, like, what are my strengths, or what are the ways that I operate best?
Mm-hmm.
And then what are the situations or environments where that is easier or harder?
Right.
And how can we design and build in, make sure that we have a higher likelihood of success, so that we have more capacity for the things that are more consequential.
Mm-hmm.
And so those things, I've seen there are 3 buckets
Okay.
that those things fall into. There's innate strengths, like just something within inside you that you couldn't help yourself but do.
Right.
So the systems thinking is one example. There's learned skills or knowledge. So this comes through experience, like this comes through,
Yeah.
things that you've incorporated, and that you now own. You've got it. And then there's external or prosthetic support. What's around you, your context and environment. And so context and environment could mean assistive technologies. It could mean Post-it notes that you write reminders on and stick them on your screen.
Right.
It could be having a whiteboard behind you.
Yeah, that's right.
Or it could be, having a thought partner to talk things out with.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the whole, like, working with your operating system.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that the basic premise here I'm hearing is that whether we're an individual or a leader managing individuals, as an individual, we need to understand, what are the requirements in each of these different environments, as you mentioned, for us to do our best work. If we're going to be in an office space where it may be busy, a lot of noise, if we're going to be in a quiet room, what is if it's in the morning and the afternoon, if after I exercise, before I exercise, what is the formula for each of us as individuals to where we can do our best work? And then there's the next thing as a leader, as you mentioned, there's situations where a person is taking up a lot of airtime in a meeting, or I just told them they needed to focus on this, and then suddenly 5 minutes later they're doing that. So as a leader, we need to understand these different approaches, how the environment impacts our people, and how we can enable our people by giving them the right support, the right environment, the right time and materials, and how we can enable them to do their best work.
Yeah. And also by modeling that.
Yes. And so tell me more about the modeling aspect of leadership.
A lot of people that I work with have started being like, oh, when I'm a little bit more open, not necessarily vulnerable, but transparent, I need a minute to write that down.
Yes.
Otherwise, I won't remember. I'm afraid this isn't making sense because I don't have a diagram. Do you mind sketching something out? Or, so those are to do with memory. Or even, let's think. Oh, even something like this, where I'm like, hi, I lost the thread. Can you give me a second to just kind of hop back on the train?
Yes.
Yeah, so when people model that without embarrassment, without shame, And also may also state some of the, not necessarily the reasons, or sorry, not the diagnostics, like I have ADHD, therefore I need this, but it helps me to remember if I write it down, or it's recounting the behavior as a reason, like the function of that behavior, rather than the origin of the need,
Hmm.
is really, really helpful, because that makes it easier for people who are experiencing, situational or temporary challenges.
Hmm.
Yeah, like I have a migraine today, I'm going to be off camera.
Yes.
or things like that, and it just makes people, it's part of psychological safety. So it's not just in leaders trying to figure out and manage what needs to be done for other people without their input, but it's also modeling, these are the various ways that it's very easy to accommodate normal human needs.
Yes. Hmm. And so sometimes, as you mentioned, is it important to articulate your situation? As you mentioned that, like for instance, if you're going into a situation where you're presenting and you may be, or you may be distracted, say that for instance, your dog might have died that day, or you're going through this difficult time, a death in the family, something like this. Is it important to acknowledge these things when you're so people can understand your situation, or is there a way to handle that effectively?
I mean, it varies from situation to situation,
Yeah.
but thinking about the impact that you have, the higher up in an organization, or the wider the net that the ripples that you create,
Mhm.
um, the more power your own transparency has. And it normalizes the challenges that other people might have, and they may not have the same clout. So it's not just modeling for people who may be in similar situations, but it's also setting the tone for acceptance,
Mhm.
regardless of status.
Yes.
And it is not, I mean, when it comes to something that is more stigmatized or misunderstood, which leads to stigma, it's often delicate in terms of disclosure. Something like migraine
Mhm.
might be easier. Something that is to do with chronic fatigue that has no visible, that,
Yep.
uh, or even neurodivergence. Like there are other people's expectations of what that is or what that should be, can cloud things. And
Mhm.
but that said, it is one of the things we've been seeing over the past 10 years around neurodiversity, as in all brains work differently. Neurodiversity is normal. Like, is just more of an acceptance and understanding and openness to considering, oh, maybe this is what's going on for me, or I experienced some of that. Oh, so this is where the idea of neuro-inclusive practices
Mhm.
does come in around. Yeah, like if you normalize wearing sound canceling headphones in an open plan office, then it's not weird. Like,
Yeah. Mm.
like that. But great
Right.
question. Yeah.
Right. As we come into the top of our conversation here, I do want to steer the our direction back to the concept of burnout and overwhelm, and how to handle that, especially if you're in today's world when we're just getting so much information. So, what are some of those for a lot of the clients that you have? What are the typical guidance that you give them to navigate burnout and overwhelm?
Mm. So as a coach, I don't generally provide advice,
Mm.
but I can tell you what what clients. So coaching is more like a thought partnership,
Yeah.
um, helping people tap into their own understanding through different perspectives. Um, and so burnout and overwhelm, a framework that is helpful for gauging is different types of bandwidth. And I can provide this to your listeners afterwards. I have a little thing on the 7 different types of bandwidth. And when we think about energy or tired, we think about, well, maybe we're like, oh, we're cognitively drained or we're physically exhausted. But there are some other areas too. And so this is a really, really cool way to be like, where do I have more that I might be able to leverage in order to help with a deficit somewhere else? Or what's the status of things across the board? So those types of bandwidth are creative, emotional, mental or cognitive, physical, sensory, social, and then values or purpose. And yeah, like when you put it like that, you're like, oh yeah, like it's not just about where are you drained or where are you overwhelmed, but also where do you have a craving to do more? Like where are you spending more time on creative and emotionally draining pieces, but there's not a lot of social support, or like, you have a sensory need for more music or light or color. And then the values piece is also is really important. And so that's one thing in terms of overwhelm. But what often happens is, well, where are you overusing your strengths? Where are you leaning on the things that are easy, that are innate, even if they're no longer adaptive at that point? So creative thinking, well, you don't want to be constantly reinventing the wheel. High empathy, that can lead you to like really be taking on and being a sponge for other people's emotions. So there's, okay, well, how can you back off from that? How can you let your system, your life system, support you? How does your calendar, how can you help? You mentioned times of day. How can your calendar help support so that you're doing the right activities at the right time when you have more in the tank for those sorts of things? Many of my clients have had a lot of transformational results, being like, oh, instead of going from deep work to meeting to something else, chunking them up so that when my brain is firing on all cylinders and I don't need to be making snap decisions in meetings, that's when I'm setting aside maker time rather than manager time. Maybe in the afternoons where I have more social energy and less of the hard thinking, I'm able to have conversations and dialogues. So that's when I do my one-on-ones. So thinking about, okay, well, how can we, what types of energy, what types of bandwidth do you have at different times of the day or the week or the month? Or like, where are we right now? Are you in a period of burnout, or are you just slightly depleted today? And so they have different aspects. So it's really cool. And the way that we approach it is not in a let's devise the perfect plan and implement it.
Yeah.
We learn from reflecting on experience. We learn from experience, but we learn most from reflecting on experience. And so we use a more iterative method with design thinking, really. Here's a hypothesis, here's an experiment. I think that mornings will be good for this and afternoons for that. Let's try it for a couple of weeks. So there's less pressure, it's lower stakes if it's an experiment. Then you collect the data and you're like, you know what? That worked except for one day. And what happened on that day was this other thing. And that tells me more about my needs, my operating system, my values. So then I can tweak. You're basically building up a user manual to how you work best in order to mitigate and minimize burnout and overwhelm, which result from too much friction in our everyday lives. It's so cool doing this. And just, when people really have found rhythms and patterns and systems that work for them, they don't work all the time, but they work consistently enough that there's still, like, I mean, the human experience is what it is, right?
Yes, for sure. Well, Frankie, as we come to the top of our time today, what are the top things that can be the most important for leaders to understand and know right now to really make best use of our conversation here?
Mm. Well, this concept around executive functions,
Hmm.
executive functioning as cognitive processes, not as what you do as a C-suite
Yeah.
executive, um, and how all of us, regardless of, um, regardless, we experience executive functioning challenges some of the time, and many neurodivergent people experience those executive functioning challenges all of the time.
Mm.
So what we can use in terms of understanding what's worked in the world of ADHD and what I now bring to my leadership coaching clients is these executive functions are context dependent. You will have brain fog some days, some weeks, and not others. And these executive functions are the cognitive processes that help us make sense of things, figure out plans, make decisions, enact those plans, see them through, and communicate them. So they're basically everything that we that we do that isn't instinctive, and that it's natural and normal to have variability in those, and that the more stressed we are, and collectively we are more stressed than ever.
Hmm.
Collectively, we are taking in more information than before. We are closer to our threshold of our prefrontal cortex and our executive functioning skills not being as accessible. So there
Yeah.
are many, many ways. So first of all, there's no shame. This is normal. And secondly, it's context dependent. And knowing that, it means that you can tweak your systems and environments and habits and tools in order to more effectively support your executive functioning and that of your team. But, start with yourself. And then, yeah, that's part of the operating system.
Yes. Well, thank you, Frankie. So, as we look forward to the rest of the year here, what is getting you excited? What are you looking forward to?
Mm. Well, I'm taking on new clients in September. Most of my work is coaching, and I'm doing a lot of executive coaching engagements, and so that's really exciting for me right now. Um, I may also start gearing back up on speaking.
Oh,
Talk to a lot of corporate ERGs and at product and design conferences on, executive functioning and how it applies to all neurotypes. I try to make it sound less nerdy than that so that people understand, but like, how does your brain go? And yeah, so that's what I'm really excited about right now.
where can our leaders go if they want additional support? Maybe they want to bring you on as a coach, or think about where your future appearances. Where can they find more information about you?
Well, LinkedIn is definitely the place to start. Frankie Berkoben, Berkoben. And I'd love for people to reach out. You can DM me with anything that you found really useful in listening to our conversation, Sam and I's conversation today. Yeah, LinkedIn is the best place.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the discussion. This has been very insightful for me. So thank you so much, Frankie.
You're welcome. Thank you, Sam.
All right. So for all our listeners out there, as we thank you for joining us on today's call. And if you would like to learn more, I mean, definitely go to the YouTube channel and subscribe, and we'll keep you up to date on things. And we'll see you next week on the People Strategy Forum. All right. Take care.